And we're back. All right, Naheed, welcome back to another Chat with Coaches. Welcome back, all the viewers, all few of you who are here, and those of you watching after the fact. Thank you for joining in. Naheed, welcome back. How's your week been so far?
It's been great, and you know what's even better? Lots of comments that people are watching the videos and things are beginning to click for them.
Nice.
Now, it would be great if some of these commenters can say, "Hey, we'd like to hear more of this subject," or "That was really interesting. Can you expand more on that?" We would love to be able to do that for you guys.
Absolutely. Or scenarios, right? Like if you have a situation that you want to analyze, like a few months back, we had one of the viewers actually reach out and say he had a scenario he wanted us to talk about and kind of delve into and really kind of dissect it.
Mm-hmm.
We could be happy to do those as well. So if you have situations such as my dog barking, for example, that you want to dissect, which I can't help with because he just does that. But other than that, we can do that. We're happy to talk about those situations and kind of talk about how we might coach the person or you through the situation, what things you can look at from a business perspective, from a mindset perspective, and kind of dissect the situation so you can better handle it in the future if that kind of thing comes up again.
Yeah, and I like what you just said because, we get blindsided. We may forget that this particular person, this particular event, this particular situation triggers us, and then we go down and we think, okay, well, that won't happen again. And guess what? If we're not mentally prepared on how to handle it, that's exactly what happens. It happens again, and then we're blindsided again, and we're either frozen or stuck, or we get into this fight and flight mode. So, yeah, I like that idea. Let's talk it through so that you have a game plan.
And also, one of the things we do as coaches is identify patterns in behaviors, and that kind of give us the kind of pathway to get to the beliefs that we can effectively change. And those patterns come up over time. They're obviously they're blind spots a lot of times where our clients we work with have behavioral patterns that they don't notice until we ask those questions. Like, where else is this showing up for you? Like, where else have you seen this happen in your life? And then they're like, oh, wait, actually this happened here, or that might have happened there. And until you look at that kind of stuff, you don't necessarily know what's happening. So when we have these kind of scenarios we can look at and dissect, we can kind of at least allow you to take that mental path, that way to figure out where else is this happening before, where might it have happened in the past before, to the point where you can actually now effectively make changes in your life and in your behaviors.
I think this is a great future session for us to talk about because there's so much in there. But I know you have a really good topic that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So today we're talking about the word should and the concept of should and shouldn't and need to and don't need to. And as a business owner, from that perspective of things, and people do it on the individual side of things too. But from the business perspective, I work with a lot of clients, a lot of business owners, a lot of CEOs and executives in general who just have this issue where they feel like I should be doing X. Insert whatever you want to do into X, but behaviors. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. And the problem I have, people who know me know I'm not a huge fan of the word should. There's a place for that word. It is not in common usage as much as people use it. People say I should be doing this. Well, when you say you should be doing that, that means whatever you're doing now is wrong, or whatever you did is wrong. And that's not always the case. Could you have handled it better? Possibly. But based on what you knew at the time and based on the information you had in front of you and based on your past experiences and your beliefs, you probably handled it as best as you could. Now, if you didn't, then that's a different conversation, right? But a lot of times our blind spots affect us in a way we don't necessarily understand. And so we handle things the best we can given our current scenario, our current situation, our current level of awareness. And saying that you should do something or should have done something differently, that just makes you wrong. And then your brain processes that as you being wrong. And so then you're even harder on yourself than you were in the beginning.
Yeah, now you're talking my language. It's all about resistance, right? Because the moment you start judging yourself, you start judging your behavior, you start judging some aspect of you as being right or wrong. There's so many different things that go along with it. First and foremost, then your self-worth, you're tying to something external. So if I did do this and it worked out the way I thought it was going to work out, then that means I'm good, I'm happy, life is good, and I'm not going to judge myself. But the moment that you didn't do something or it didn't go the way you wanted to, it's not just that you should have done something. It's not just that judgment. Now you're judging yourself because you're saying, oh, look, I did something wrong, and my self-worth as a result is going to be tied to that. I'm always talking to people, make a divorce between your self-worth and what you think you need to receive or what your results are going to get. The two are not connected at all. You deserve because of who you are, and then you take those action steps as you need to take the action steps. But that doesn't mean you're good or bad, one way or the other. The results do not define you and your identity.
100%. And that I love what you said about divorcing those two things, because ultimately we do that, right? We tie these things together, these external forces, and we tie our value, we tie our worthiness to external things that we have zero control over, right? And the guy I was talking to yesterday, he was talking about these. He listed about 10 different external things that I won't get into all the details of what he said, but all these external situations of which he has zero control over, that he was like, oh, I should have done that, should have done this, should have done this. And it was like, okay, well, based on what you knew at the time, based on what you were doing and what you believed at the time, what you knew to be true, did you act as best you could? And he was like, well, I guess, yeah. I'm like, but knowing what I know now, I'm like, no, take that aside. Forget what you know now, because ultimately you learned a lesson, right? And now with that new knowledge or that new awareness, yes, absolutely, you would act differently if you knew if we knew the future, wouldn't we act differently? Like if I knew that Google stock or Apple stock or Amazon stock was going to go where they are now, back in 2004, I would have absolutely bought a lot more of it. But hindsight's 2020 for a reason, right? So we can only act based on our awareness of what we know to be true right now. None of us can see the future. None of us know for sure what's going to happen in the future. And so we can't act according to what we know is true retroactively. And so when you tie your external value to things you can't control, you're giving up control over your worthiness, over your value. And so naturally, you're going to eventually feel like crap, right? You're going to look at yourself as invaluable, as not invaluable, as lacking value, as unworthy, as, not good enough, because you're tying your value to these things that you have no control over. If I tied my value to Apple stock, what control do I have over Apple stock, right? I have zero control over it. So Apple could go up or down, and then I'm like, oh, I feel shit about myself today. Oh, today I feel great because Apple's up. And tomorrow's like, oh, I feel like crap because Apple's down. But then I don't have any control over that. Nothing I do is going to change that. And so I'm giving up all control to some external force that doesn't really matter to me ultimately, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't care what Apple stock does unless I have money involved in it. But either way, that's again external. Money is also external. All these other success factors that other people define for us are external to us. And so going back to the should and shouldn't, when you should on yourself, and I say this a lot, don't should on yourself, right? Because you're shoulding on yourself. You're literally shitting on yourself because you're giving yourself, making yourself feel like shit because of things you think you should or shouldn't have done.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to share a formula that my business coach shares with me. It's called BE, times do equals have. And the way it works is, and I don't know if we've shared this before, but the way it works is you start from the right to the left. The haves are all your goals. What are the things that you're looking for? The B column are what are the action steps that will help you get to those goals? And then, sorry, the do column are the action steps that will help you get to those goals. And the B column is with what mindset are you showing up? Are you coming to it? Are you doing the shoulds, right? From fear, lack, desperation? Because if that's the case, no matter how much you do, how much you fill your calendar up, if you're coming from that place, it's going to feel like you're hitting a brick wall because you're not coming to it from a place of expansion. You're coming almost to it from a place of expectation that my external value is tied to these items on my to-do list. And really, that's never going to be the case. It's never a winning strategy, right? When you think about sports figures, which I could not name you even one, but I'm sure you can come up with a few, Drew. They start thinking of themselves as being great before the first game, and then they start practicing that as the way they would practice physically. They practice it mentally. So you've got to have that balance. Otherwise, just the shoulds on their own is completely out of alignment and out of balance.
Absolutely. And going back to the question of as a business owner, as a CEO, as an executive, or any kind of leader, what should you be doing? The answer is there's no answer to that, right? It's not like there are going to be times when you don't have stuff to do, and you can just either create stuff to do for yourself. And there are times when you should have downtime. And I say that in that situation, I say should intentionally, because you need to create downtime for yourself. If you don't have downtime, you will go crazy. So we all have to create the downtime for ourselves and make it okay to not have to do stuff sometimes. You can have a couple hours a day sometimes for periods of time where you're not actively doing work. You're not actively managing people. You're not actively doing things like that. You can create a task for yourself in that time, or you can also use that time to really reset and have a mindfulness practice or a pause practice for yourself that'll allow you to be more effective when you start doing stuff again. Because ultimately, eventually, there will be times where all the things you're doing are outsourced. As that high level leader, part of that is outsourcing and delegating a lot of that work and trusting your employees, trusting your partners, trusting your team members to do their jobs. And so once you delegate and outsource that work, there will be times when you don't have anything immediately in front of you. And you obviously go out there and prospect more and do more of that kind of work. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to kind of sit today. I'm going to kind of sit for the night, these 2 hours or an hour or even a day sometimes, and just say, you know what? I'm going to take some time for myself because I haven't for the last 6 months or a year, especially as a business owner. And I think the problem that a lot of business owners run into, especially people in technical fields or the subject matter experts, they say that they're creating a business for themselves, but in reality, you're creating just another job. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a job. It's probably like 10 jobs because you're doing all the jobs of the entire company all in one. Naheed, have you had that experience with people or with yourself for that matter?
Yeah, so I will tell you, for me, last October, November, maybe a little bit earlier than that, I was crazy busy. I mean, I literally would give myself 10 minutes in between to eat lunch because I'm running from one appointment to another appointment to another appointment. And insanely enough, that's when my business tanks. And this is not the first time it's happened. It's not the second time it's happened. But by that time, I told myself, why am I going to be doing this over and over again? When I see the pattern, you talked about patterns. I know my pattern. My pattern is I need to have white space in my calendar. So I schedule in my dog walk. It has to be in the middle of the day, so that's what I schedule in. We absolutely get into this trap that if we do more, then all of a sudden the results will be that much greater. But I've taken a step back and looked at who my role models are. Certainly there are role models out there who wake up at 4 in the morning and they get the power workout and then they do their meditation and then they're there for like 7 hours of work where they're running around like crazy. But that's not my energy. And there are many other role models who are doing really well in my field, my coaching field of more metaphysical kind of stuff. And that's not how they operate. And they are doing extremely well. So I've decided, for me, that's the model I'm going to follow. Not going crazy with the shoulds and I don't and why not, and then beating myself up as a result of it. And I've done much better because of that.
I love that. And it is ultimately what works for you. And you got to create that for yourself. You know yourself better than anybody else. You know, there's a lot of books out there, like The Miracle Morning is one that comes to mind with like the guy Hal Elrod. And it's a great guideline. I think that's there's nothing wrong with adopting that if that works for you. But you have to make it okay to not adopt that if you don't want to. If that doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you, right? And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you know what? I'm not that person. It's not going to work for me that way. But I think one thing that you mentioned about the people who have those like power mornings where they get up at 4 a.m., they do what they got to do. The workouts, they also have a meditation and a workout in there, right? That's physical. That's getting themselves out of their heads. So that's starting the day like that or putting that in the day somewhere allows you to get out of your head. A lot of people don't take that and understand what's behind that, right? And that reminds me of this story, which is, again, goes back to the whys of things, right? And there's this guy, he lives in an ashram, like basically a collection of places in India, like what do you want to call them? A monastery, right? He grows up there, and then as they do these, his father is like a priest, and as they do these different like rituals, then he's like observing them and like, oh, very, very close, like, okay, I want to watch this and see what happens. And his dad, every time they do this religious function, his dad takes this cat and puts it in a basket outside of the hut that they do this religious function out of, right? So this kid grows up and he moves to New York, and he wants to continue these rituals, so he does the religious functions at his place in New York. So his uncle comes to fly out to meet him from India, and he sees the kid, and they hang out and whatever. And then he does this ritual, and uncle notices that this kid finds a cat, a stray cat, takes it, puts it in a basket outside of the room he's doing this religious function, and then does the function. So after this function is done, the uncle asks him, hey, why'd you take that cat and put it into the basket? And he's like, well, my dad always did that. My dad always took this cat and put it in a basket outside of the room where they did this religious function. And the uncle says, You never asked him why he did that, did you? And he goes, no, why is that? He's like, because that cat was roaming around the place and always would mess up the religious function. So in order to avoid that happening in the future, he put the cat in the basket to keep it out of the way and then took it out after the fact. So you're sitting here running around finding some random cat somewhere just to put it in the basket because you never asked the question why. You never asked him, why did he put the cat in the basket? So that's what that's the problem with blind following these things. If you don't do what works for you, what makes sense, you're just going to be some idiot putting a cat in the basket because you don't know why. So don't put the cat in the basket. Understand why the cat goes in the basket and see if the cat needs to go in the basket when you're doing your work. Because for you, it may not be a workout. It may be to walk with your dog. It may not be a meditation. It may be reading. It may be journaling. It may be going for a run. It may just be sleeping in a little extra. It doesn't have to be a 4 a.m. day. You may be a night person. You may be someone who wakes up at 10 and goes to bed at 2. But then you wake up at 10 the next day. You're still getting 8 hours of sleep. You're still functioning at the way that makes sense for you. Now, are there impacts to that? Absolutely. A lot of the world gets up at 8 or 7 or whatever, and you'll miss those first couple hours with other people. But if your job is dependent on you primarily or your business, then do what makes sense for you. And only you can answer that question. No one can tell you what needs to actually happen to make you successful or to make your business thrive. Only you can tell you that.
So as you were talking about this, it reminded me of somebody I used to coach many, many years ago when I first started. She was a financial planner and she used to work for a company and then decided that she was going to go solo. And then all of a sudden she said that she started getting hip pains. And she went to the doctor, they checked her out, there was no issue related to that. And she wanted us to be able to uncover during our session what's going on. So it might sound strange to you as a mindset coach. I actually do work a lot with people on physical issues because your body and your mind are very connected. So in our process, what we uncovered is that because she switched and started working for herself, she would go exercise later in the day around the time when her daughter would come home from high school. And her daughter was a social butterfly. So she would come home, eat something, and then off she went. She wasn't at home for very long. And then she didn't come back until around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And so what was happening was the mother, the lady I was working with, was missing the time that she spent with her daughter. This 1 hour or 2 hours that she had, she was off exercising, and her subconscious made that the barrier so that she couldn't go out and exercise. And so as we were tapping, I asked her, so what do you think is the remedy for this situation? She's like, change my hours of workout. Right? Because she used to work out 6 days a week in the past. She couldn't even work out 1 day without getting pain. And then as soon as she shifted around her workout hours so that she was home when her daughter was home, no more situation that occurred. It's something as simple as really paying attention to what works for you. Because social media is so prevalent, we have a tendency of seeing the people who do this hyperactivity and we kind of make the connection in our brain, their success is related to their hyperactivity. We're not really noticing all the people who aren't quite like that. They're not advertising, hey, woke up at 10 o'clock today, went for a nice leisurely swim, whatever that happens to be. So yeah, I like your idea. I mean, I like your story as well.
Thanks. And thanks, Kandria, for the comment. I appreciate it. I'm glad that resonates with folks. I hope it does. But to your point, Naheed, I mean, that's something that people don't tend to look at, right? Social media, everyone can quote me on this. Social media is bullshit. Okay? It's absolute bullshit. You're seeing these people posting at their best times in their lives. You're not seeing people who post, hey, I had a really rough day today. Some people do, and that's great because they're actually being vulnerable and actually letting people know that, hey, things are not always rosy and wonderful, because they're not always rosy and wonderful. If you think of that person who's posting only wonderful beach pics or all the travel pics in the world and all these amazing views, guess what? They have bad days too. And they're not going to post those, understandably. But you're only seeing a very slanted view of the world. And you're going to understand that there are things where you are going to have a rough day. You're going to have time when you need to sleep in extra sometimes. You're going to have times when you need to sit there and you say, you know what? I need to cancel a couple of my meetings to take a couple hours back to myself, or spend time with my kids, or spend time with my dog, or just go for a walk and just be alone for a while. Because we as human beings have to recharge. We have to have that time for ourselves. And if we don't see that, if we don't force ourselves to do that, because it's very tempting to get into this thing of like, oh, everyone on social media, all the business owners on social media saying, get up early, grind, yeah, no days off. That sounds great. But anyone who has no days off for too long is going to go insane. As Naheed said, you're going to have physical pain, you're going to have mental pain, you're going to have headaches, you might have you make yourself sick, right? And I think a lot of times you see these people online and they're and kudos to them if they can actually do this every single day, but you're only seeing the best version of them. So don't feel like that's reality, because social media is not reality. Social media is going to be honestly like 80% lies, you know what I mean? Or exaggerations. And you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, I gotta do that. I want that. And it's so easy to turn to the shoulds. I should be doing that. I should do this more. I should do that. And you see all these posts, like these business mindset things where it's like, oh, 80 ways to make $10 million a month just by sitting at home on the couch. And it's like, yeah, not really. That's kind of not actually the case, because to sit on the couch, you have to actually do like 10 years of work to do that first. And you listen to some people and they're like, oh, I just use a $1 million loan from my dad, or $100,000 here that I started with. It was a very small amount of money. To who? Right? I mean, if you have the means to start that way, then absolutely great. That's a great advantage to have. But understand that not everyone's coming from that advantage, and you have to get to that point where you're able to have that time, that energy, that business, those resources. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry, the word I'm looking for. Resources to invest in that stuff and to start that place, right? Because not everyone starts at the same place. That's where the whole idea of equity comes from, and that's why, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of those people are already in the middle or top of the pyramid. They're not. And if you don't know what Maslow's hierarchy of needs, by the way, there's a guy named Abraham Maslow. He's a philosopher. He had an awesome idea, which is basically it's a pyramid that says there's a hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, you've got food, shelter, sex, and safety. At the very bottom, that's the basic structure of humanity. If you don't have that foundation, you can never move up the pyramid, right? Once you get those things, and notice money is not one of those things. I want to point that out. Money is probably in the middle, because once you get those things at the bottom, then you can look at money. And also, obviously, it's a cycle in some ways. But at the very top is self-actualization. And that's where you're looking at, I want to be my higher self. I want to be the best version of myself. And you can't even see past that point if you never get those bottom things in place. And so you're looking at these people online, at these social media posts, and you got to ask yourself, though, where did they start? Did they start at the bottom of the pyramid? If you're a single mom working with 2 or 3 kids, and you got to worry about paying the bills and feeding mouths and feeding yourself and getting things done, and you live in a city of any kind in this country, not in the middle of nowhere, you have a lot of money you need to pay out. So you have to figure that out and get that bottom thing figured out first. Get the bottom of the pyramid figured out. So are you able to really do that top of the pyramid stuff? Probably not. So look at that stuff as well and see what people started from. And if they don't share that, there's a reason they're not sharing that.
Yeah. So you're talking about Abraham Maslow, very big in the field of psychology, and it is a very interesting, his pyramid structure is very interesting, because originally what he said, he's now long since been dead, was that people in developed countries like the United States are beyond the first couple of tiers, which is just safety. And now psychologists are saying, no, that may be true from a very basic standpoint. Most of us have a roof on our head, but we still feel very emotionally unsafe and threatened. And of course, many of us continue to have a lot of safety. Food insecurity is a big thing, but this is a different story over here. I will say one thing that I do find as the underlying reason for shoulds, and it doesn't matter whether it's personal or professional, in my world, they collide a lot, is guilt, right? We have been made to feel guilty our entire lives if we did not conform to a particular thought or particular behavior. And that's really how we are trained. I mean, it's a form of control, even though our parents don't think of it that way. This is how they make us do what they need us to do when they tell us to do it the first time, is because there's that guilt factor if you don't do it, or fear factor if you don't do it, right? So it is so deeply ingrained inside of our psyche that it takes self-awareness to understand, kind of like that story. We don't stop and ask why. Okay, so why am I doing this? Or why am I not wanting to do this? We don't stop and ask those questions. Or is this even relevant to me? One of my clients wants to move into a completely different industry, and he's also looking at who are the giants in that field. And I said, okay, but what works for them does not have to be the same thing that works for you, right? Don't just look at their model and think that that's the only way to be successful. You have completely different skill sets that needs to be leveraged as well.
Yeah, and I think about, when I say that, I think about like guidelines versus requirements, right? People look at these people that like models like Tony Robbins or like Gary Vaynerchuk, or these people who are really successful and did amazing for themselves and did really, really good work, and then they're saying that that's requirements. I have to do exactly what they did. But in reality, they're just guidelines. They're things that, yeah, you can emulate stuff that they did, but ultimately what is going to make you successful is going to be the ability to iterate on what they did and change it and adjust for what makes sense for you. Think about clothes. Are you going to wear the same size clothes as that person? No, probably not. Maybe, but probably not. And so if you can't wear the same shirt that they wear, or you can't wear the same size shoe as them, or you can't wear the exact same suit as them, then guess what? That's probably not going to be the case with their behaviors either. You can try their behaviors, but then iterate on that and see what makes sense for you. Have the freedom to be flexible. But what you said also, Naheed, is very powerful about control. And in this country, we don't, and most countries, honestly, in terms of primary education, you don't necessarily train leaders. You train followers, right? You train kids to say, I'm just going to do whatever my teacher says because they said it. That was a problem I had as a kid. I got in a lot of trouble because I always asked why are we doing this? What's the point? And they're like, no, don't ask why. I do it because I said so. Because I said so is not an answer. As a parent, it might be an answer, but still, it's just like, explain why, right? There's value in that. And, it's something where you grow up with that. And then over time that should becomes a thing. It's like, you should do this because you were told to do it. And that's enough of a reason. So now you should do it. And so now all these gurus out there who are telling you should do this, should wake up at 4 a.m., you should, do all these other things you need to do. Now you're like, oh, well, I should do that. So I'm going to listen to what they say no matter what. And it tends to have that effect on the psyche, like Naheed said. So
we are complex beings. I wish we could be more like dogs.
Well, dogs are trained. Dogs are very simple, but they're also, it's fear or love. Same thing. We actually are pretty similar to dogs, believe it or not, right? In terms of behavioral change, it's all fear or love, right?
True, but also they are trained. I mean, as I'm working with Lucy to get her trained, but
Most of them are trained.
mostly trained. Let's say, put it that way. But they don't lose sight of themselves. I'm not saying that they won't do something that they are trained that is against their nature, asking them to listen to English or whatever language and following something that they don't fully understand is against their nature. But there's this innate knowingness of themselves. We, on the other hand, kind of lose ourselves in all of the messaging that we get. And I think, when you first started the conversation today, what it reminded me of the shoulds and shouldn'ts and judging yourself for it, we don't leave room for self-awareness and self-growth. Our life in general is all about self-awareness and self-growth. It's the path towards greater self-awareness and self-growth. And somehow or the other, we've got it in our heads that once we hit a particular number, I don't know, 21, 31, doesn't matter, we should have had ourselves figured out, right? That there's no more self-awareness kind of going on. When that's never going to be the case. I see it in my parents as they are growing as well. And so I hope to continue to grow. And at the end of the day, any kind of rigid structure is denying the possibility of self-awareness, which will always go against our nature. And it will feel uncomfortable because if you don't change, something's going to come around to force you to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's adapt or die, right? That's the way the world goes. And, die is an exaggeration, but it's adapt or feel the pain of not adapting.
Exactly.
And as a business, that happens as businesses too. Like if the business don't adapt, if you don't adapt to the market conditions or the way that the entire world is changing, look at the last year as a great example, for the businesses who couldn't adapt, and there's some that couldn't, just really their nature of the business required in-person stuff, and they suffered for that. Right. And that's just the nature of that business. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a thing. But there's some businesses who could have adapted and refused to adapt. Right. Should they have adapted? No. Could they have? Probably. Right. Those businesses that could have adapted. And so you'll see that in the market conditions change as the entire environment changes and the landscape changes. But we're actually getting up on time here. Naheed, any last minute thoughts you want to share before we jump off here?
Yeah, to me, shoulds are very, very important to pay attention to in our lives. As a mentor of mine actually recently told me to do that for myself. I am so hyper focused on it on other people because I pay attention to their language as they're talking to me. But take a moment for your own mental well-being to stop and say, where are all the shoulds in your life? And you'd be surprised. You probably come up with a long list. Not all of them need to be changed, but probably some of them cause you quite a bit of stress.
Yeah, love that. I think that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys all for tuning in today. Before we end, I just want to mention that my brother and I are partnering to do this giveaway. We're giving away a PS5 as a grand prize, and as a second prize, two second prizes, they're going to get a choice between a micro coaching session with me or a aesthetics consult with my brother. And either one can be delivered remotely or in person, depending on where you are. But remotely is always an option. So if you guys are interested in that, we're going to put the link in the description below, so you guys can click on that and check that out and enter and figure out how to do that. It's really simple. There's no purchase necessary, nothing like that. But we'd appreciate your support and growing our social media presences and sharing our content as to those folks who you think might be relevant to.
Why don't you give us a quick rundown on who Dr. B is and what he does, because you just introduced him as your brother.
Ah, yes, I apologize for that. Yeah, you're correct. So my brother Jason Biharla, Dr. B, he's internal medicine ICU trained doctor, but he also has a wellness practice based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it's wellness and aesthetics. And he does medical practice as well as Botox injections, as well as other aesthetic things that I don't actually know the full list of his menu of services, but they're all pretty cool as far as I hear. And so they help a lot of folks down there. He loves his patients. He works with them really passionately. And his company's called his business is called Premier Wellness Associates, and they're based, like I said, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So we'll put the link to his website in the description below, as well as a link to the actual giveaway.
Yeah, and I want to just give a testimonial for Dhru because we've done a coaching session, and I can guarantee you, I'm not a PS5 person. That's probably not what I would choose, but I can guarantee you, if you do have a coaching session with him, you're going to walk away with tremendous clarity. So, PS5 is short term, coaching and insights is, long term benefits. Just as a little testimonial.
I appreciate it, Naheed. I did not pay her to say that, by the way. I just want to point that out. All right. Well, thank you guys all for tuning in. If you like this video, please hit the like button, hit share, and subscribe. And let us know what you want to see in the future. I think, call back to what Naheed said at the beginning of this session. Please, let us know what you want to see. If there's scenarios you want us to talk about and dissect, we will not. If you want to stay anonymous, you can absolutely do that. But you can also share your information, and we are happy to talk about it directly to you on here and tackle issues and tackle scenarios that you want to tackle. But thank you guys all for tuning in. I appreciate it. We love the support you guys are giving us every other week. We want to continue doing this going forward. So thanks.
See you guys.